Hey there. I'm really glad you're here today because this conversation, it's not just about words. It's about how we carry ourselves in a world that's always asking us to speak louder, prove more, show off what we know. But here's the truth. The smartest people I've ever met, they don't always have the fastest answers. They're not the ones who dominate every conversation or try to sound impressive. Their real power comes from knowing something most people miss. You don't need to say everything you think. And often, the most intelligent thing you can say is nothing at all. I know it sounds simple, even counterintuitive in a world full of opinions, hot takes, and social media debates. But this idea is grounded in something timeless: Stoic philosophy. Think Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. These weren't guys shouting over each other to be heard. They were leaders, warriors, thinkers, who understood the strength of stillness. One of my favorite Stoic ideas is this: sometimes what you don't say says more about you. And I've seen that play out in my own life. I remember sitting in a meeting once, 10 people at the table, and one guy couldn't stop talking. Every idea, every topic, he had a take. But when he left the room, the only thing people remembered was how much space he took up. Compare that to someone who listens carefully, speaks with purpose, and isn't afraid of silence. That's the kind of person others respect. Not just for what they say, but for what they choose not to say. So today, we're diving into 9 phrases intelligent people never say. Not because they're flawless, but because they've learned it often the hard way, that some words don't just make you look foolish. They block growth. They shut down connection. They weaken trust. And before we jump in, let me ask you, have you ever caught yourself saying something just to sound smart? Or maybe held back and later realized it was the wisest move you made that day? This video isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming more aware, more grounded, and maybe a little more at peace with not having to prove everything. So if you're ready, let's explore what not to say, and more importantly, why. Stick with me. I think this one might just shift how you speak and how you lead. Let's start with a phrase that sounds smart, but often backfires. You've probably heard it or even said it yourself. Yeah, I already know that. It rolls off the tongue so easily. It sounds confident, even capable. But let me tell you something from personal experience. That phrase is a trap. Years ago, I was sitting with a mentor, someone I really respected. He was explaining a process I had done 100 times before. And before he could finish, I jumped in. Yeah, I know that already. He paused, looked at me, didn't say much, just moved on. But that moment stuck with me. Because later that night, it hit me. I didn't just interrupt him, I shut myself off from learning something he saw that I didn't. Something his experience had taught him that I hadn't lived long enough to see. And the worst part, I didn't even realize I was doing it. See, that phrase, I already know that, doesn't just close a conversation, it closes your mind. It signals, there's nothing left to learn here. But here's the truth. That's not intelligence. That's ego. Marcus Aurelius, one of the wisest Stoics, put it best. You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. Knowledge isn't a box you check. It's not a trophy you put on a shelf. It's a river always moving, always changing. You can step into the same place twice, but the water will never be the same. And here's the thing intelligent people understand. Even if they've heard it before, they still listen. Because sometimes it's not about the information, it's about the perspective. I once watched an old carpenter graybeard, decades of experience, listen patiently as a young apprentice explained a technique he'd probably used in his sleep. He nodded, asked questions, even thanked the kid for sharing. I asked him later, "Why didn't you just say you already knew all that?" He smiled and said, "Because I might hear it in a new way. And if not, I've still practiced humility." That stuck with me. So the next time you feel that urge to say, yeah, I've heard this, pause, take a breath, Ask yourself, what might I still learn here, even if it's familiar? Because real wisdom, it comes from staying curious, from listening with respect, from knowing that no matter how much you know, there's always more to see. Let that be the difference between sounding smart and actually being smart. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had an idea, maybe a bold one, and the first thing someone said was, "That's impossible." Yeah, me too. And every time I hear it, it sounds so final. Like a closed door. But here's the thing. When someone says, "That's impossible," they're not usually talking about facts. They're talking about fear. Let me tell you about Robert. I worked with him years ago. Smart guy, experienced. He carried himself like he had it all together, shoulders straight, voice steady. But anytime a new idea came up, trying a new strategy, shifting the market, even reaching out to a difficult client, he'd shut it down with 2 words. "That's impossible." At first, it sounded responsible, safe. After all, who wants to waste time chasing unrealistic dreams, right? But over time, I realized something. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. From what? From failure. From being wrong. From not having all the answers. And that's what Stoic philosopher Seneca meant when he said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Most of the time, it's not the challenge that defeats us. It's our belief that we can't handle it. Fear doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it shows up wearing a suit called logic, caution, reason, responsibility. But when you dig deeper, you realize it's just resistance, and resistance kills growth. I remember a project I once led. The budget was tight. Timeline? Ridiculous. The team? Inexperienced. Everything in me wanted to say, "This can't be done." But instead, I asked a different question. What can we do today? That project turned out to be one of the best experiences of my career. Not because we pulled off a miracle, but because we didn't freeze. We just kept moving one step, then the next. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's the lesson. The obstacle isn't the problem. Our mindset is. So the next time you hear or think, "That's impossible," pause. Ask yourself, is it really impossible or just unfamiliar? What's the smallest next step I can take? Because intelligent people don't just avoid fear, they move through it. One small action at a time, and that's not just courage. That's wisdom in motion. Let's talk about a phrase we've all probably said, or at least thought at some point. "That's not my fault." It's quick. It's automatic. And honestly, it feels good to say in the moment. Because when things go wrong, our natural instinct is to defend ourselves, right? To draw that invisible line between us and the problem. But here's the truth, something I learned the hard way. Every time we say, "That's not my fault," we give away something far more important than blame. We give away power. Let me share a story. A few years ago, a friend of mine, let's call him Mike, lost a major client, big account. Huge blow to the company. And Mike? He was ready with the reasons. The client was impossible. The market shifted. My team dropped the ball. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. Those things were all true, to a point. But what struck me was this. While Mike was busy explaining why none of it was his fault, he completely missed the chance to learn anything from it. He stayed stuck repeating the same patterns because in his mind, it was always someone else's responsibility to fix the problem. Now compare that to something the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In other words, things will go wrong. People will fail. But how we respond, that's what defines us. When you take even a sliver of responsibility, when you say, "You know what, maybe I could have communicated more clearly. Maybe I should have followed up one more time." You shift from being a passenger in your life to being the driver. You stop waiting for others to fix things. You start becoming the kind of person who leads, even when the road gets bumpy. And here's the kicker. Taking responsibility doesn't make you weak. It makes you respected. Because people notice when you own your part. It builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. I've seen it in my own life. The moment I stopped pointing fingers and started asking, what can I do differently next time? Everything began to shift. That mindset is what Stoics call self-mastery. It's not about being perfect. It's about being accountable. Because blame is easy. Responsibility, that's where growth lives. So next time you're tempted to say, that's not my fault, pause. Ask yourself, what if owning just 1% of this could change everything? That's not weakness. That's the strength of someone who refuses to be powerless. Let me ask you something. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I've got this. I don't need help? Yeah, me too. It's almost baked into us, isn't it? This idea that a real man or a strong person handles it all. Alone. No complaints. No support. No handouts. We admire the lone wolf. The self-made success story. It's practically a Hollywood script. But in real life, that mindset comes at a cost. Here's what we're not told enough. The refusal to ask for help doesn't make you strong. It often makes you tired, isolated. And over time, it can break you. I learned this the hard way. There was a season in my life where I thought I had to carry it all: work, family, finances, expectations. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to admit I was struggling, so I smiled. Said I'm fine, and just kept going. But inside, I was running on fumes. Until one day, I finally opened up to someone I trusted. I said, I'm not okay. I need help. And you know what I found? Not judgment, not weakness, but relief, connection, and more strength than I ever had alone. That moment changed everything for me. Now let's take it back to history for a second. Most people think of Abraham Lincoln as this stoic, solitary figure, shouldering the weight of a divided nation. And in some ways he was. But what we often overlook is this. Lincoln constantly surrounded himself with advisors who disagreed with him. His cabinet was famously called the team of rivals. He wasn't afraid to ask for help or hear perspectives that challenged his own. And that wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man of his time, openly credited his mentors, his teachers, even his friends for shaping who he became. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. So, why do we? You see, strength doesn't come from never needing anyone. It comes from knowing when to reach out a hand and when to take one. Epictetus said, "No man is an island," and he was right. So if you're telling yourself, I don't need any help, ask yourself this instead. Is that strength talking? Or pride wearing a clever disguise? Because real strength, it's not about carrying the weight alone. It's about knowing when to say, I can't do this by myself, and trusting that you're not meant to. Let's talk about a phrase that sounds harmless, maybe even kind of funny, but carries a heavy cost. I'm too old for that. Now maybe you've said it about learning something new. Maybe it was about starting a business, traveling, going back to school, or just dreaming again. I've heard people say it with a laugh. But underneath that laugh is often something much deeper: resignation. Like the best chapters of life are already written, and what's left is just the credits rolling. But let me tell you a story that absolutely shattered that myth for me. There was a man named Harry Bernstein, a quiet, ordinary guy who worked as a magazine editor, raised a family, paid his dues. At 93 years old, Harry sat down to write his first book, 93. Most people at that age are thinking about slowing down. Harry, he was just getting started. His book, The Invisible Wall, was rejected multiple times. But finally, at 96 it was published. And it didn't just go to print, it took off, translated into several languages, touched readers across the world. He went on to write 3 more books, all after 96. So the next time your brain says, "I'm too old for that," ask yourself, too old for what? Too old to matter? To create? To grow? Because Harry proves that as long as you're breathing, there's still time to do something meaningful. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once reflected that age means nothing to the soul. It's not the years that limit us, it's our mindset. And I've seen this firsthand. I've known men in their 60s who learned to code, women in their 70s who started mentoring youth, people in their 50s who finally gave themselves permission to chase that dream they'd shelved decades ago. What they all had in common wasn't time, it was belief. They didn't see age as a finish line, they saw it as a tool. Because with age comes clarity, resilience, a deep understanding of what matters and what doesn't. Look, we're all aging. That's the deal. But growing older isn't the same as being done. The Stoics teach us this. As long as life is still in you, your duty is to live it fully, to keep learning, to keep contributing, to keep becoming. So if you've been putting something off because you think the window has closed, maybe it hasn't. Maybe you're just now becoming the kind of person who can do it well. And that's not the end. That's the beginning of something powerful. Let's be real for a second. There's one phrase that sounds so harmless, even reasonable, but it quietly steals more dreams, more connection, and more peace than we realize. It's this one. I'll do it later. We've all said it. Sometimes it's about calling someone back, or starting that side project, or finally having that hard but important conversation. It feels like a promise, like we're being responsible, pacing ourselves, waiting for the right time. But here's the truth I had to learn sometimes the hard way. Later is an illusion. It's a soft, comfortable place where our best intentions go to die. Let me tell you a story. There was a man I once knew, let's call him Thomas, busy guy, ran a business, had a beautiful family. And like a lot of us, he kept telling himself, "I'll spend more time with Dad when things slow down. I'll take him fishing, I'll visit, I'll call." But he never did. Work was always hectic. The timing was never perfect. And then one day, his dad passed away. No more chances. Thomas was left with a phone full of unsent drafts and a heart full of things he never said. He told me that story years later. Not for sympathy, but as a warning, because we think we have time until we don't. The Stoics spoke directly to this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think, not to scare us, but to wake us up, to remind us, time is not something we control. We don't get to schedule when we say what matters most, or when the window for action closes. The only moment we own is this one." I've seen this in my own life. 2 letters I didn't write, apologies I delayed, dreams I put on a shelf thinking I'd circle back later. And when I finally stopped waiting and started doing, even if it was messy, even if it was small, it changed everything. So let me ask you, what's that thing you've been meaning to do? That call you've been putting off? That next step you've been overthinking? What if you didn't wait for the perfect moment? What if you just started? Because wise people understand something most folks don't. Action creates clarity, and regret only shows up when we choose comfort over courage. So the next time your mind says, "I'll do it later," pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what if now is the only moment that truly matters? Start now, even if it's just one step. Let's talk about a phrase that sounds like honesty, but underneath, it's often just a quiet surrender. That's just how I am. You've heard it before. Maybe you've even said it. When you lost your temper, when you avoided hard conversations, when you stayed stuck in a pattern that no longer served you. It sounds like self-awareness, doesn't it? But if we're being honest, it's usually not. It's not truth. It's not wisdom. It's an excuse. An easy way out of doing the hard work of change. I get it. Change is uncomfortable. It asks a lot from us. It asks us to question old habits, rewrite our identity, face things we've spent years avoiding. But here's what I've learned, and what the Stoics taught over 2,000 years ago. You are not fixed. You are not frozen in time, Epictetus said. It's not events that disturb us, it's our judgments about them. In the same way, it's not your nature that holds you back. It's the story you keep telling yourself about who you are. And those stories, they can be rewritten. I once worked with a guy, let's call him Dan. Every time we gave him feedback, he'd shrug and say, "That's just who I am." He thought it made him real. Honest, unapologetically himself, but really, it was fear. Fear of failure. Fear of facing the fact that he could be more, if he'd just step into discomfort. And I've been there too. For years, I told myself I wasn't a detail person, that I was too spontaneous, too scattered. But really, I just didn't want to slow down, focus, and train that muscle. When I finally stopped hiding behind that excuse and decided to become someone more disciplined, things changed. My work improved, my relationships got better, and so did my self-respect. That's the point. Growth isn't about hating who you are. It's about respecting yourself enough not to stay stuck. Intelligent people don't use, "That's just how I am," as a defense. They use it as a checkpoint, then ask, "But is that who I want to keep being?" Because life is movement, nature is change, and we are meant to evolve. So the next time you hear that voice inside say, "That's just how I am," pause for a second, ask yourself, or is that just who I've been? The difference between those two questions? That's where transformation begins. Let's talk about one of the sneakiest excuses we use, one that sounds so logical, so mature, that we rarely question it. It's just not the right time. You've said it. I've said it. We've all used it to postpone big decisions, bold moves, or honest conversations. And sure, timing does matter in life. Some things really do need patience, but more often than not, saying, "It's not the right time," is just fear dressed up like wisdom. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, let's call him Nate, had dreamed for years about starting his own business. He'd built the skills, saved some money, made the connections. But every time we talked, he'd say, "It's just not the right time. The market's a little shaky. The kids are young. I need a little more clarity." Fast forward 5 years, still waiting, still dreaming, still telling himself that someday would be better than today. Now here's the Stoic truth. There's no perfect moment. There's only this moment right now, and Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's not meant to scare us. It's meant to wake us up. Because most of us aren't waiting on timing. We're waiting on certainty, on a guarantee we'll succeed, that it won't hurt, that everything will line up just right. But life doesn't work that way. Starting something meaningful, whether it's launching a dream, fixing a relationship, getting healthy, or simply telling someone how you really feel, won't ever feel completely safe. And yet, it's worth doing anyway. I've delayed plenty in my life too. Told myself I needed to wait until I was ready. But if I'm honest, most of my biggest breakthroughs came not when I was ready, but when I was willing to start messy, willing to risk being imperfect, willing to move even while afraid. So let me ask you, what have you been putting off under the excuse of not the right time? What dream, decision, or change is quietly waiting for your courage? Because intelligent people don't wait for life to get easier. They act with urgency, clarity, and intention, knowing that waiting often costs more than starting ever would. So maybe the right time isn't some date in the future. Maybe the right time is now. Here's one you've definitely heard before, and maybe even said yourself. "I don't care what people think." Sounds bold, right? Sounds like confidence, strength, freedom. But let's pause for a second and look a little deeper. Because very often, "I don't care what people think" isn't real confidence. It's defense. It's a wall we throw up when we feel misunderstood, judged, or rejected. I've been there too. I remember years ago, after sharing a new creative project online, someone left a pretty harsh comment, and my immediate response? I don't care what they think. But you know what? I did care. I had poured my heart into that work, and their words stung. Saying, I don't care, was just my armor, and here's the Stoic twist. It's not about caring too much what others think, ... And it's not about pretending you don't care at all. It's about caring wisely. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly, if it's not true, don't worry about it. If it is true, fix it. See, intelligent people know this. We live among people. We grow through relationships. We should care about the right opinions, those of trusted mentors, friends, and people who see our potential. But when we try to shut out all feedback, we shut out growth, too. The key is learning to filter the noise. Don't be ruled by everyone's opinion, especially not strangers on the internet. But don't use I don't care as an excuse to avoid reflection, accountability, or personal evolution. Here's a better approach. Ask yourself, is there truth here I can use? Even if I don't like the delivery, is there something worth growing from? That's what wise people do. They stay grounded, not guarded. They're open not to everyone, but to what matters. So next time you're tempted to say, I don't care what people think, try this instead. I care deeply about growing, and I'll listen to what helps me do that. That's not weakness. That's wisdom in action. So let's bring it all together. We've just walked through 9 things intelligent people never say, not because they're perfect, but because they've learned, often through failure, that words matter, that the way we speak reflects how we think and how we grow. Maybe you've said one. Maybe you've said all 9. I know I have, but that's not the problem. The problem is staying unaware, because once you see it, you can shift it. And that's what intelligence really looks like. Not always having the right answers, but being humble enough to ask better questions. Growth isn't loud. Wisdom doesn't need to shout. And real strength? It often looks like curiosity, patience, and the courage to try again. So here's my challenge to you. Reflect on these 9 phrases. Which one shows up in your life most? Which one are you ready to leave behind? Drop a comment. Share this video with someone who's walking the same path. Let this be a conversation, not a lecture. Because at the end of the day, wisdom is not perfection. It's progress through humility, reflection, and thoughtful action. Stay curious, stay grounded. And I'll see you in the next one.